You're in a meeting. You have an idea, a genuinely good one. You can feel it forming clearly, and you open your mouth to say it. And then something happens. You look around the room. You notice someone's expression. You suddenly become very aware of how long you've been talking, or how much space you've been taking up. And the idea, still perfectly intact inside you, comes out smaller than it was, softer, hedged. This might be a silly thought, or, I don't know, maybe, or you just let it trail off completely, and nobody notices, because nobody was looking for it. The only person who knows what just happened is you. Now here's what's strange. You've done this before. You've done it so many times that it has its own rhythm now. You've made yourself smaller in rooms where you felt too much. You've laughed off things that actually hurt. You've said, "I'm fine," when you weren't, and "it doesn't matter" when it did. You've taken up less space in conversations, in relationships, in your own life, not because you were asked to, not because anyone demanded it, but because some part of you decided at some point that being less was the safest way to stay. And the question worth sitting with, the one most people never think to ask, is this: when did you first learn that your fullness was a problem? Because it was learned. It always is. Here is where the story really begins, not with you in that meeting room, but with a much younger version of you, in a much smaller room, trying to figure out how love worked. When you were a child, you needed to be loved by specific people, not abstractly. Specifically, the people in your immediate world. And if those people, for any reason, responded better to you when you were quieter, smaller, less demanding, less emotional, less yourself, your brain did what every young brain does with that information. It filed it. It learned. Maybe you were the child whose emotions were too big for the room. Maybe you cried and someone made you feel embarrassed for it. Maybe you were excited and you could see someone's patience running out. Maybe you had needs and you watched someone's face shift, just slightly, into something that looked like burden. And without any of this being said out loud, without anyone sitting you down and explaining the terms, you understood. You understood that certain versions of you were received well and certain versions were not. And you began, slowly and unconsciously, to curate yourself. This is not a character flaw. This is a survival adaptation, and a remarkably intelligent one. Developmental psychologists studying attachment and early childhood have consistently found that children are exquisitely attuned to the emotional states of their caregivers. They can read shifts in tone, in facial expression, in body language, with a level of sensitivity that most adults have learned to suppress. And when those readings tell them that their authentic self is creating discomfort, they don't throw a protest or file a complaint. They adapt, they reshape. They find the version of themselves that keeps the warmth on. Psychologist Winnicott Donald, one of the most influential figures in developmental psychology, described the formation of what he called the false self. Not false in the sense of fake or dishonest, but false in the sense of constructed. A version of the self that is assembled primarily to meet the expectations and needs of others, rather than emerging naturally from the inside. Winnicott observed that in children who were not given enough space to simply exist, to be messy, to be difficult, to be fully themselves without consequence, this constructed self could become dominant, not because the true self disappeared, but because it learned to hide, to wait, to emerge only when it felt safe enough, which for many people is rarely or never. Now consider what this looks like in an adult. You are at dinner with people you care about. The conversation moves to something you feel strongly about. A real opinion forms in you, something genuine and specific. But instead of saying it clearly, you read the room first. You check expressions, you calculate whether this will land well or create friction. And depending on that calculation, you either soften the opinion into something vague and agreeable, or you keep it entirely to yourself and offer something easier instead, something that requires nothing from anyone. Or, here's another version. Someone close to you says something that hurts, and you feel it. The feeling is real and immediate and legitimate. But before it can become words, you run a different calculation. Is this worth bringing up? Will it create conflict? Will they get defensive? Will it make things awkward between you? And more often than not, you decide that no, the peace of this moment is worth more than the honesty. So you smile, you carry it, and you add it to a list that only you can see. That list has a weight to it. Every unsaid thing, every swallowed feeling, every moment you made yourself smaller to make someone else more comfortable. It accumulates. And the strange thing about this kind of accumulation is that it doesn't announce itself loudly. It doesn't show up as a breakdown or an explosion. It shows up as exhaustion, as a low-grade disconnection from your own life, as a feeling of going through motions, as the sensation, familiar to so many people who grew up learning to be small, that you are somehow present everywhere, but genuinely yourself nowhere. Sociologist Irving Goffman, whose work on social performance changed how we understand human behavior, described everyday social life as a kind of theater. We are all, he argued, performing for the people around us. We manage impressions, we choose which parts of ourselves to present and which to keep backstage. And on one level, this is simply true. Nobody is completely unfiltered all the time, and complete unfilteredness wouldn't actually serve anyone. Social life requires some degree of self-monitoring. But here is the distinction that matters enormously, and that most people who grew up shrinking themselves have never quite heard articulated. There is a difference between thoughtfully choosing how to express yourself and being afraid to exist fully, between social awareness and self-erasure, between reading a room and disappearing into it. The person who is thoughtfully choosing how to express themselves still has a clear sense of what they think and feel. They're making a considered decision about timing, or context, or kindness. The person who is afraid to exist fully has often lost contact with what they think and feel entirely. The self-monitoring has become so constant, so automatic, so woven into every moment, that the question, what do I actually want here, barely even registers anymore. Because wanting things, having preferences, taking up space, all of it has been quietly rerouted into, what can I offer? What can I do? What version of me will cause the least disruption? And this is where it becomes truly costly, not because you are broken, but because you have been running for years on a version of yourself that was assembled for someone else's comfort. And that performance is exhausting in a way that is almost impossible to explain to someone who hasn't lived it. Researcher Brené Brown, whose work on vulnerability and shame has reached millions of people, has spoken repeatedly about what she calls hustling for worthiness. The idea that some people, rather than simply feeling worthy of love and connection, have learned to earn it, to perform for it, to prove themselves into it. And the exhaustion of that hustle is profound, because the finish line never comes, because a sense of worth that lives outside you, in other people's approval, in other people's comfort, can always be revoked. So you keep going, you keep adjusting, you keep making yourself smaller, and you call it being considerate. You call it not wanting to cause trouble. You call it being low maintenance. But what it often is, underneath all of those polite names, is fear. Fear that your actual self, unedited and unperformed, would be too much, or not enough, or simply something that people wouldn't choose. And here is what that fear doesn't know. Here is what it has never had the chance to discover. It has never actually been tested. Because the real you, the one with the full opinion in the meeting room, the one with the hurt feeling at dinner, the one with the things they want and the space they need, has never been given room to show up and see what happens. The fear has been running the experiment for you, and it has been rigging the results. Let's talk about something called self-silencing. Psychologist Dana Jack, who first developed this concept in the 1990s, studied it primarily in the context of depression in women, but its reach extends far beyond any single demographic. Self-silencing, she found, is the process of suppressing one's authentic voice, thoughts, and feelings in order to maintain relationships and avoid conflict. And she found something striking. The more a person self-silenced, the more disconnected they became from themselves. The more they performed care and agreeableness for others, the less they could access what they genuinely felt. This isn't difficult to understand intuitively. If you practice ignoring your own signals long enough, the signals get quieter, not because they stop being true, but because your nervous system learns that broadcasting them doesn't lead anywhere useful. So it turns the volume down, and you begin to feel, in a way that's very hard to articulate, like you've lost the thread of yourself. Like you're not quite sure what you actually think, or what you actually want, or who you actually are when nobody needs anything from you. If any of this is landing for you, here's something worth knowing. The shrinking wasn't random. It came from somewhere real. It made sense in the context where you learned it. Being seen as too much, or difficult, or demanding, in the environment where you first learned to be a person, carried real consequences. Your adaptation was intelligent. It was, in the truest sense, the best available option at the time. But here is what changes. You are no longer that child. The room is different now. The people are different. And more importantly, the consequences are different. Your authentic self, showing up fully in a conversation, having a genuine opinion in a meeting, saying clearly what you feel and what you need, will not collapse everything. It might create friction sometimes. It might make some people uncomfortable, but it will also do something else. It will finally let you know who is actually here for you, because the people who only want you small aren't really seeing you at all. They're comfortable with a performance, and you've been giving that performance for so long, and it has cost you so much. Here is the thing about taking up space. It feels enormous from the inside. It feels like you are being loud, demanding, difficult. But from the outside to the people watching, it almost always looks like something else entirely. It looks like someone who knows themselves. It looks like groundedness. It looks, to the people who are capable of genuinely connecting with you, like exactly the thing they were hoping to find. The fullness you've been hiding is not the problem. It never was. You're in that meeting room. The idea is still perfectly intact inside you. The room is waiting, even if it doesn't know it yet. This time, you don't hedge. You don't apologize before you've even said anything. You don't make yourself smaller to make room for a discomfort that might not even be there. You say the thing, not because it will definitely land perfectly, not because everyone will understand, but because you have spent long enough making yourself an echo of the room, and you are tired of it. And somewhere, in the saying of it, in the simple act of taking up the space that was always yours, something begins to shift. Not all at once, never all at once, but enough. For now, enough.